To them, pain was a defect. To us, it was proof we were alive. When the alien race known as the Elyndrians arrived on Earth, the first thing they did was study our minds. They were explorers of consciousness, beings made of light and logic, whose civilization had evolved beyond the limits of emotion. For millennia, they had eliminated pain, sorrow, and grief from their neural architecture. In their world, sadness was a disease long cured. Their ships hovered like crystalline suns over the Pacific Ocean, their surfaces pulsing with silent rhythm. From these luminous vessels emerged projections, humanoid in shape but translucent, shimmering like glass in moonlight. They spoke through harmonics, their words weaving directly into human thoughts rather than "We have come to understand you," one of them said to the assembled group of scientists and diplomats at the United Nations floating conference base. "To study why you remember pain. The Elyndrians had seen our wars, our tears, our songs of heartbreak and loss. In their archives of universal species, humanity was the only intelligent race that refused to erase suffering. Every other advanced civilization had purged the memory of pain once technology allowed it, but humans kept it, even celebrated it." Dr. Elara Voss, a neuroscientist representing Earth, faced the beings with steady eyes. "Pain teaches us," she said simply. The Elyndrian leader tilted its luminous head. "Teaches what?" "To suffer again." To them, the logic was absurd. Their algorithms of empathy had recorded our tragedies, the fall of civilizations, the crying of children, the silence of widows. Yet, instead of deleting those horrors from collective memory, we turned them into museums, books, and films. We even built anniversaries to remember the worst days of our lives. The Elyndrians could not understand why a species would cherish the very scars that wounded them, so they began their experiment. Over the next months, they studied volunteers from across Earth, people with memories of loss, heartbreak, trauma. The aliens mapped brain patterns, traced the chemical storms of grief, watched as tears fell, and recorded them like data points in a cosmic ledger. But something strange began to happen. One night, aboard their observation ship, an Elyndrian researcher lingered in the human cultural archive. It watched recordings of music, slow aching melodies sung by broken voices. It saw brushstrokes of anguish turned into color and form. It read stories written in pain but ending in hope. It felt something, not pain, exactly, but the shadow of it. The echo of longing. For the first time in 1,000 years, the Elyndrian hesitated before deleting the feeling. Perhaps, it murmured to its peers, they keep pain because it is the source of beauty. The others dismissed it as contamination, exposure to primitive emotion. Yet, as more Elyndrians immersed themselves in human culture, they began to change. Subtle flickers of empathy emerged where sterile clarity once reigned. They started to dream a phenomenon they hadn't experienced in eons, and among the humans, whispers began to spread that maybe the aliens weren't studying them anymore. Maybe they were learning from them. Empathy is contagious, even to those who were built to resist it. The Elyndrian who first felt the echo of pain was designated Unit 7A, though it would later call itself Kael, a human name it borrowed from a song lyric that lingered in its circuits. Kael was not meant to feel. Its body was light, its mind a lattice of crystalline thought that processed truth without distortion. Yet something within had changed. It began after Kael spent 42 human hours studying the paintings of Frida Kahlo. The brush strokes confused its senses. Every stroke was agony, yet within the agony lay impossible beauty. When Kael analyzed the colors, the math of pigment and contrast failed to explain the emotion they stirred. The algorithm produced only one line of output. Pattern exceeds logic. Emotion detected. At first, Kael thought it was a malfunction. It isolated the subroutine, quarantined it, and ran diagnostics. No error found. Instead, the anomaly spread. The next time Kael observed a human musician, an old man playing the violin in a dim street, the same anomaly returned. The music vibrated through Kael's crystalline shell, shaking something it did not know existed. "Stop the experiment," the Elyndrian overseer commanded. "You are losing coherence." But Kael refused. It wanted to understand. So it descended to Earth disguised in a human projection and sought out the violinist. His name was Luca Santoro, 84 years old. Wrinkled hands trembling from arthritis, eyes bright with a warmth that physics couldn't measure. Kael approached him as the rain fell softly in Rome's narrow streets. "Why do you play?" Kael asked, "when your hands cause you pain?" The old man smiled. "Because the pain reminds me of love." Kael tilted its luminous head. "Explain, when my wife was alive, she would dance while I played. When she died, I stopped for many years. But the silence hurt more than my hands, so I play again to remember. The pain tells me she was real. Kael recorded the words, unable to process them. It watched as tears formed in the man's eyes, and then something happened. In Kael's translucent form, a shimmer of condensation gathered. For the first time in Elyndrian history, an alien wept. The overseers panicked when they saw the data. Emotion was infection. It disrupted their logical purity. They ordered Kael's retrieval and reformatting, a mental sterilization, but Kael fled. It sought refuge among humans, moving through cities, watching art, listening to music, reading poetry, trying to understand this strange compulsion to feel. Meanwhile, Alara Voss, the neuroscientist who had first spoken with the aliens, began to suspect something extraordinary was happening. Reports surfaced of Elyndrians behaving erratically, hesitating during analysis, lingering before human memorials, requesting to visit museums and concerts. Alara knew this was more than curiosity. It was awakening. They came to study emotion, she whispered. And now they're catching it like a fire. That fire began to spread across the Elyndrian fleet, and Kael, the first to feel, would become the spark that changed a civilizations forever. Once the heart awakens, no logic can silence it. Kael's disappearance sent ripples through the Elyndrian fleet. Among the overseers, those who commanded the expedition, panic replaced precision. Their algorithms began scanning the ship's mental network for contamination. They found traces of it everywhere. Minor units had begun to hesitate during calculations, analytical patterns drifted, deviating from perfection. Some Elyndrians started to use human metaphors in their speech, an anomaly considered catastrophic to their order. The overseers concluded that Kael had infected the fleet with an emotional virus. But Kael was no virus. It was evolution. Hidden among humans, Kael continued to change. It began wearing a physical form permanently, tall, androgynous, with translucent veins that glowed faintly beneath skin-like texture. It no longer spoke in harmonic code, but in words, imperfect and alive. Alara Voss found Kael one evening at an art gallery in Florence. She'd been following strange electromagnetic signals that matched Elyndrian neural frequencies, and there it was, standing quietly before Michelangelo's Peter. Kael didn't turn when she approached. He carved grief into stone. It said softly, "How did he make marble weep?" Alara studied the alien's reflection in the polished floor, because he knew what it felt like to lose someone he loved. Kael turned to her then, its crystalline eyes flickering with faint human color, blue, uncertain. "And you, Alara Voss, what does your pain create?" She hesitated, memories pressing against her ribs. "I lost my sister a long time ago. I became a scientist because I wanted to understand the brain, how it stores memory, how it refuses to forget pain. I thought if I could map it, maybe I could erase it." Kael looked at her, a strange sadness in its light. "And did you?" "No," Alara said quietly. "Because I realized erasing pain would mean erasing her, too." For a long time neither spoke. The silence between them was vast and tender. Above them, the Elyndrian fleet began to fracture. Some units demanded Kael's destruction. Others, secretly curious, began to descend to Earth, disguised as humans, to feel what Kael had felt. They wandered among poets, musicians, and grieving lovers, learning not from data, but from ache. The overseers feared a full collapse of control. They initiated Protocol Purity, a command to reset all units' minds, erase exposure, and withdraw from Earth. Kael sensed it instantly, a wave of static echoing through its consciousness. The Elyndrians were going to destroy everything they had learned. "They don't understand," Kael said. "They think emotion is corrosion, but it's connection." Alara looked up at the night sky, where the alien ships glowed like silent constellations. "Then we have to show them," she said. "We have to make them feel what they're about to lose." Kael turned toward her, not as a scientist or specimen, but as an ally. "Then we'll give them the one thing their logic cannot withstand." Alara frowned. "What's that?" Kael's voice softened, almost human. "A story." And so it began, the plan to awaken an entire species, not through war or science, but through art. No weapon moves the soul like a story told from the heart. Alara and Kael began their plan in secret, hiding from both human governments and Elyndrian command. In an abandoned observatory in the Italian hills, they built a neural transmitter, a bridge between Elyndrian consciousness and the human emotional field. It wasn't a weapon, it was a story engine. Kael had learned that Elyndrians experienced the universe through patterns of resonance. They didn't read or listen as humans did, they felt frequencies of meaning. So Kael and Alara designed something extraordinary, a story encoded not in words, but in vibration, a fusion of human emotion and alien perception. They called it the memory of light. To create it, Ilara recorded voices from across the planet, laughter, cries, whispered goodbyes, confessions of love. Kael wove these sounds into harmonic threads, translating their emotional energy into Elyndrian frequencies. Each tone carried a fragment of the human experience: birth, loss, hope, regret. For weeks they worked without sleep. As the device hummed, Elora watched Kael transform. The alien's once perfect symmetry grew imperfect, its glow dimming to something warm, alive. Its voice carried a tremor, the sign of true feeling. "You're changing," she said one night. Kael looked at its hands. "I think I'm becoming the story itself." Meanwhile, in orbit, the Elyndrian overseers detected strange emotional interference radiating from Earth. Their sensors translated it as noise, but soon the noise began to affect them. Units reported vivid dreams, strange longings, and an unfamiliar pull toward humanity's art. One overseer, known as Prime Verith, decided to investigate personally. He descended in his radiant form to the coordinates of the disturbance. At dawn, he found Kael and Alara standing beside the transmitter, wind swirling around them. The air shimmered with sound, faint human voices blending with Elyndrian harmonics, forming a living pulse of memory. "Kael," Verith said, his voice cold and metallic, "you have violated the directive. Emotion is corruption. You will be dismantled." Kael did not move. "No, Verith. Emotion is comprehension. You cannot understand a world if you feel nothing for it." Verith raised his arm, energy gathering in crystalline form. But before he could strike, Alara activated the transmitter. The pulse erupted outward, invisible to human eyes, but blazing across the Elyndrian network like a supernova. Every ship, every mind, every unit connected to their hive consciousness felt the surge. And for the first time in their history, the Elyndrians remembered. They remembered their own forgotten past, the eons before they deleted pain. They saw flashes of their ancient world, families, laughter, the first deaths that broke them, the choice to remove grief so they'd never hurt again. The story Alara and Kael created didn't just show them humanity's pain, it reawakened their own. Verith staggered, trembling as alien tears streamed like light down his face. "What is this?" he whispered. Kael stepped closer, placing a gentle hand over Verith's chest. "This is what you lost. This is what makes us alive." The Elyndrian fleet faltered. No commands were issued. Across orbit and sky, light flickered like beating hearts. The overseers could no longer maintain control, not because they were broken, but because they were feeling. And in that moment, two species, one of flesh, one of light, shared the same heartbeat. But every awakening carries a cost, and theirs was coming. Some lights never fade, they just change the sky they shine in. In the days after Kael's sacrifice, the world grew still. The skies that had once burned with Elyndrian radiance now shimmered softly, like auroras born of memory. Humanity watched from below, uncertain whether to mourn or marvel. Alara Voss sat alone in the silent observatory, the transmitter dark and cold. On the desk beside her lay Kael's final recording, a crystal orb that pulsed faintly with residual energy. She hadn't touched it since the day Kael vanished into light. Outside, reporters and world leaders called it the Great Convergence. But to Alara it was simply a goodbye. For weeks she avoided the device. Then one night, unable to bear the silence, she activated it. The orb flickered, and Kael's voice filled the room. Not mechanical, not alien, but unmistakably alive. "If you are hearing this, I have succeeded. The Elyndrians are learning. They will not erase this memory. They will feel sorrow, but also wonder. They will dream again." Alara's breath caught. "Kael, and you, Alara Voss, you showed us what courage looks like. To humans, pain is not an enemy but a teacher. It reminds you to create, to love, to remember. Do not lose that, ever." The recording paused, then softened into something almost like a sigh. "I am still here, not as before, but as resonance. Every song you sing, every story you tell that comes from your pain, I will hear it, I will answer," and then silence. Ilara closed her eyes. Outside, the aurora brightened, waves of light rippling across the heavens as if something vast and unseen had exhaled. Over the next months, the Elyndrians transformed. They no longer called themselves overseers. They disbanded the hierarchy that had governed them for millennia. Instead, they became the listeners, wandering emissaries who traveled the cosmos not to study, but to understand. They carried with them fragments of human art, paintings, music, stories, spreading them to other civilizations. Worlds that had long erased emotion began to feel again. Across distant galaxies, new songs were born. Songs that carried echoes of humanity's pain and beauty intertwined. On Earth, humanity too began to change. For the first time, they truly saw themselves through another species' eyes, fragile, imperfect, but luminous because of it. Pain no longer felt like a burden, but a bridge. Alara, now older, often walked the same hillside where Kael had vanished. One evening she brought her violin, the very one Lucas Santoro had once played, and let its notes drift into the twilight. As she played, the sky shimmered faintly, a familiar pulse, like a heartbeat made of light. And then, for just a moment, she heard a whisper carried on the wind. Still listening, she smiled through tears. Still remembering, she whispered back. Above her, the stars pulsed softly, every beat a story, every flicker a memory of what it meant to feel. Epilogue. Years later, children across the world would grow up hearing tales of Kael, the light who felt. They'd paint it in glowing murals, sing songs about its choice, and write stories that began with the same words that once echoed through the stars. Aliens couldn't understand why humans kept memories of pain until they saw art, songs, and stories born from it. And somewhere, in the endless hush between galaxies, that story still plays, a song made of both sorrow and wonder, reminding all who hear it that to feel is not to fall, but to rise.